Climate Corporation. And thank you for taking the time out of your morning to join this webinar where we're going to talk about a few features of the FieldView platform. Number one, field health images and how you can use those most effectively throughout the course of the season. And secondly, some of the scouting and note-taking functionality and how that can be incorporated in your operation as you're out in the field looking at things and trying to figure out and communicate what's going on in the field. A couple of notes before we get started. Number one, to keep the background noise down on the call, I have gone ahead and muted all the phone lines. But as always, the most important thing that I can do on these webinars is answer your questions. So if you do have questions, comments, anything that you need a little more clarification on, whether or not it is related to the topic at hand, really, I'm happy to answer any FieldView questions to help you get in a better position to use the system effectively this year. So if you do have questions about anything, please go ahead and type those in using either the chat or the question and answer functionality here in the WebEx interface, and I'll make sure that I take the time to stay on the line as long as necessary to answer any of those questions that do come in before we end the call today. That said, I think I'm pretty much ready to go, so we'll go ahead and jump in here. So I'm going to spend actually a lot of time in the climate apps themselves demonstrating some of this functionality today. And I think I'm going to just jump right into that now. And where I'm going to go is I'm going to go over to the climate web page as a starting point today. So let me try sharing my Google Chrome browser here. Let's see if I can make the technology do what I want it to do. So give me just a second here, and I will share my browser. And you should all be able to see here now my Climate FieldView account. And what I've done is I've gone ahead and logged into climate.com on a web browser, and the web browser that I'm using is Google Chrome. And we do recommend that anytime you are going to climate.com on a web browser, that you do use the Google Chrome browser. It handles a lot of the mapping applications better than things like Internet Explorer or Safari or Firefox or some of the other browsers that are out there. And so you will have the best experience if you take the time to download and install the Google Chrome browser and use that anytime you are navigating over to climate.com. But that said, I am here logged into my Climate account, and if you've never done this before, you use the same credentials that you would use to log into your mobile app or the cab app, or it's the same credentials for all the places that are Climate FieldView related. And when you log in, you'll see a list of your fields on the left-hand side and a map of your fields on the right-hand side. Now, we're going to talk about field health images first, so let me go ahead and pick one of my fields. I'm going to pick this across the road field. It's a field in Iowa. And when I go there, I click on that field on the left-hand side of the page. It's going to bring up sort of the summary of this field for the current year. Now, this field hasn't been planted yet, as far as I know. I actually don't know what's going on in this field this year, but given where it is in the state, it probably hasn't been planted yet. And there's some details on the left-hand side of the page, some of the field health images that have come in so far this year, some information if it had been planted about what the planting dates and populations were, and it's kind of the summary of this field for this year. Now, when we look at this, the first thing that does come up here for 2019 is these field health images. And what you can see so far is that there have been 2 images collected for this field in 2019. They show on the left-hand side of the page there, and one was March 23rd and one was May 22nd. So we haven't gotten a lot of images for this field yet this year, but as you are probably aware, we've had a lot of clouds and a lot of rain in most parts of the U.S. and Iowa included. So that does impact the frequency with which images come through. So far, 2 images this year, but probably both of them aren't really worth a lot to us since there's not anything growing in the field yet. But let's go ahead and, so since we haven't had a lot of useful images yet this year, let's look at 2018 instead and kind of look at that as a representation of what you might expect to get in the course of a normal year as things go along. So here I am, I'm scrolling through the images on the left-hand side of the page, the field health images that came in for this field in 2018. And as you look at some of these dates, you can see that, we got an image on, if we start, May 26th of 2018. Then we got an image, about 7 days later on July 2nd. Then we got one 4 days later on July 6th. We got one 4 days later on July 10th. 1 day later on July 11th. 5 days later on July 16th. 1 day later on July 17th. 4 days later on the 21st. 5 days later on the 26th. 5 days later on the 31st. Then there was a little bit of a gap here, about a 10-day gap to get one on August 10th. But this is the kind of frequency with which you will expect to receive these field health satellite images of your fields throughout the course of the season, assuming we have sort of normal cloudiness and rainfall patterns. Basically, any time that one of the satellites that we work with, and we don't own the satellites, we contract with a number of different satellite providers, but anytime one of those satellites passes over your field and is able to capture a relatively cloud-free image, we will send that image to you. And we will send those images for every field in your Climate Field View account. This is part of the Climate Field View Plus subscription. And so if you are a Climate Field View Plus user, you get images, whatever images we capture for all of your fields whenever they are taken. And as you can see, the frequency here varies between about 2 and 10 days, probably averaging about 1 every 5 days. But that is dependent on whether or not we are able to get cloud-free images. So if you do have a 2-week stretch where it's cloudy every day, you won't get any images during that period. Now, a couple other things about these images. That takes care of frequency. What about the resolution? So these images are all about 5 meter resolution. We do work with a number of different satellite providers, and some of the cameras are slightly different, but on average, they're going to be about a 5 meter resolution. You may see some slight variance in images from one day to another, where one looks like it's a little bit higher resolution, one might be a little bit lower resolution, but on average, they're about a 5 meter resolution. So let's talk next about the difference between scouting and vegetation maps. So I'm going to take a particular image here from this field, this July 31st image, and I'm going to take and split the screen here so we can look at 2 images at the same time. And I'm going to use 2018 imagery. And let's get to the July 31st one, so I can have the same thing on both sides of the page. So with this imagery, what we're trying to do, this is essentially your treasure map to scouting. We're going to allow you to see from above. I mean, you can't be out scouting every field every day of the season. So this allows you to kind of stay on top of what's happening in your fields, where you may have problems cropping up, where there may be biomass issues in the field, without trying to wander through the field and hope you find it like that kind of needle in a haystack. We want to be able to help point out to you as the season is going along in near real time what's going on out there, so you can spot problems sooner and react to them, or at least be aware of them when they are cropping up. So we give you 2 different versions of images, and what we're looking at right now is a scouting image. I'm going to pull up the what we call the vegetative image on the left-hand side of the page here, so you can see the difference between the 2. Because every time we send you a picture, we'll send you both of these versions of the picture of your field. So what we have on the left-hand side of the page is the vegetation map. And this is one where it's an absolute scale in terms of running from that brown or the gray all the way up to sort of dark greens. And what this is if you see a particular color green in an image, that is an indication of how much biomass is in that field, and that can be compared from field to field. A certain level of biomass is always going to be the same color regardless of what field you're looking at. And so when we look at the left-hand side of the page, we see a lot of pretty uniform green colors. And when we look at that, it allows us to know that, hey, this field, it's pretty uniform in its growth from north to south to east to west across the entire field. There's not a whole lot of variability. Yes, we can see a couple spots where it's a little lighter green, and so those are areas where there's less biomass, and so we can, understand that. But if we get this vegetation image alone, it's a little hard to pick out, hey, what's the worst part of this field? What's the best part of this field? And if I want to go out and do sort of a yield check or something like that, how do I really, when we've got fairly uniform growth here, identify the best and the worst parts of these fields? It's a little bit difficult to do. So that's why we have the scouting map that we see on the right-hand side of the page. And what the scouting map does is it's kind of like an old tube TV where you had that contrast button and you could turn the contrast up on the TV as much as you wanted. And that's essentially what we're doing here. We're taking the image on the left-hand side and we're turning up the contrast to emphasize even small differences between biomass in the field. And so the image on the right-hand side of the page may be a little bit more useful for your scouting applications because it's going to show us more clearly and a little bit easier, hey, where are the worst parts of the field? Those are going to be the areas in red in terms of biomass. What's the biomass in those parts of the field? And where are the best parts of the field? Well, those are going to be the ones in the darkest green. So if I want to go ahead and scout this field and take a look at a part of the field that has the highest biomass, compare it to a part of the field that has the lowest biomass, I can take my phone or my iPad and with this map on it, park on the side of the road, walk out into this field, walk myself to one of those dark green spots, then walk over to one of the red spots and just compare what the field looks like and easily know that, hey, I've looked at the best part of the field and I've looked at the worst part of the field, and I've got a pretty good understanding now about what kind of variability exists in this particular field. So one thing to know about this scouting map, when you look at scouting maps, you're almost always going to see red on them in some parts. And what that means is it does not mean that that's a terrible part of the field, that, hey, you've got no yield potential there, that part of the field is a disaster. It just means that compared to the rest of the field, it's the relative worst biomass in the field. And when you see dark green, that doesn't necessarily mean, hey, that part of the field is making 300 bushel corn. It just means compared to the rest of the field, that's the best part of the field from a biomass perspective, where you have the most green biomass out there. And so this picture, I think, kind of emphasizes that, hey, this whole field is pretty good. When you look at that left-hand side of the page, it's all greenish. There's some yellow in there. The field is good. So when we see the red on the right-hand side in the scouting image, that doesn't mean it's terrible. It just means it's a little bit lower biomass than the rest of the field. So keep that in mind as you look at these images. When you see red on your fields, it doesn't always mean that part of the field is a disaster. Compare the two images, and as long as the red parts on the scouting map are some sort of green on the vegetation map, then you're fine. If the red corresponds with a gray or a brown color on the vegetation map, then that means that's bare dirt most likely, and that's something where you essentially have no biomass. So that's kind of how these scouting and vegetation maps work. You can kind of look at them in conjunction, side by side, to look at the scouting map first, identify those worst parts of the field, and then pull up the vegetation map to see just how bad is that bad part. Is it truly washed out and there's nothing there, or is it just a little bit an area with lower biomass, but we still have plant growth in that area? Now, let me go back to, and again, any questions, please feel free to type those in using that chat or question and answer functionality. So let me go ahead and I'll go back and look at 2019 just to give you a comparison here on this. So if I go to 2019 and I pull up one of these images like, hey, let's look at this March 23rd image. This field was certainly not planted on March 23rd. And if I get to the right image here and choose the vegetative map, so this is one where as you look at the vegetative map on the left-hand side of the page, you can see that almost the entire map is brown or gray. Anytime we see browns and grays on the vegetative map, that means that there's no biomass there at all. It's just bare dirt. But on the right-hand side of the page, that scouting map is always going to try and differentiate. It's going to turn up the contrast on that and say, okay, what are the best and the worst parts of this field in terms of green biomass? And even though there's no green biomass out there, some of these parts of the field have a few more green wavelengths coming off them than the others. And so it gives us a map that says, hey, here's the best parts of the field and here's the worst parts of the field. But when we're at a part of the season where we don't have row closure, or essentially we don't have any plants out there at all, this is essentially a false signal. It's trying to tell us the best and the worst parts of the field from a biomass perspective, but there's no biomass out there for it to do that on. So this is essentially a useless scouting map at this point in the season when the crop hasn't started growing yet. And so this is another way that you can tell this. You just look at the two maps side by side and say, okay, I can ignore the scouting map signal. They mean nothing because there's not any biomass out there for it to detect. So hopefully that helps in understanding how these maps work. Always look at the scouting map in conjunction with the vegetation map to understand what's out there and how bad the bad is and how good the good is. But that is how you can use these maps to really understand what's going on in your field while you're sitting at home, with your iPad, with your phone, wherever you might be, before you head out to the field to do some scouting. Okay, so now a couple other things. Let me switch to another field that's got a couple examples of some things that you may run across in the field. I'm going to go over to this Hunter Northeast field in my list. And one other thing I'll mention here is that these images that you get for the field health, these field health images, let's say you're new to field view. I know we do have a lot of people that are new this year that are on the Try It Buy It program. When you signed up, you put in your field boundaries, hopefully, and once those field boundaries are in, you started getting field health images for your fields. Not only do you get field health images for this current season, but we automatically load field health images for the past 3 years as well. So while the 2019 images might not be very interesting for you yet, if you're one of these people that I know a lot of us are impacted by the rain and the weather we've had, and not a lot of crop has gotten in the ground, so there's not a lot to look at yet. But you should have data for 2018, 17, and 16 as well in here for your field health. So feel free to take some of this time to look back at some of your previous year field health maps to see what those look like and start to get a feel. You know what you planted in those fields those previous years. You know how the yield did, and you know where the good spots were and the bad spots were in that field. Look at those field health images, and I think what you'll see is that they're often a preview of your yield map, especially as you get into late July and early August. You pull up a field health map, it's going to show almost identically the same patterns that you ended up seeing in your yield map that year. So they're pretty helpful as we get later in the year, and feel free to take a look at that. But I'm going to go ahead and switch over to 2018 here on this Hunter field. And what I want to talk about is how clouds can impact these images. If a field is fully obscured by clouds when the satellite goes over, we have an automatic detection methodology that determines if clouds are there, or it tries to determine if clouds are there. And it generally won't send you images where the entire field is obscured by clouds that may be causing sort of false signals to show up in the imagery here. But that detection methodology doesn't always work perfectly, and I'm going to show you kind of how what it looks like here. I'm going to go through, and there's a May 31st image in here where, as you can see, as we look through the images on the left-hand side of the page, usually this field is one shape. It's a full quarter section with just the little house or the homestead area there cut out of it. So it's a pretty consistent shape, image to image, in terms of what area we're taking pictures of. But if we look at this May 31st image, this image is different. This is one where, hey, we only have part of the field showing through, and it looks like someone has taken bites out of this picture. Anytime you see an image like this, this means that our cloud detection methodology kicked in. It determined that it looked like there were some clouds or some cloud shadows that were causing problems in this imagery on this date, but they only covered part of the field, and so we wanted to send to you the rest of the field in case that part of the image was helpful. So what we do when clouds are present is we try and cut out the cloud and send you the part of the field that might be useful to you, so you get a partial image at least rather than nothing. And that's exactly what happened in this case. And when you get an image like this that has the bytes taken out of it, you can always check, and really on any image you can check and see, were clouds a problem? And to do that, use the True Color button in the lower right-hand corner when you're on web. If you're on one of our mobile apps, often it's a cloud icon, and by tapping the cloud icon or this True Color button in the lower right-hand corner, it will show you the actual picture that was taken by the satellite that day. And as you can see here, in this case, there were clouds and cloud shadows that were impacting the image. They definitely impacted the northeast corner of the field, and they definitely impacted the southwest corner of the field, while there was a useful section of the field that kind of ran diagonally from the northwest to the southeast. So if you go back to this, what we ended up serving to you, you can see that some of those non-impacted areas, we were able to cut out the clouds, somewhat appropriately. But that's what it means when you get an image that looks like it has these bytes taken out of it. Now, our cloud detection methodology isn't perfect. I'll show you an example where it didn't work as well as we would hope it would. if we look at these images that are coming through August, you'll see that we have if you look at the left-hand side of the page, we have a fairly similar growth pattern here. August 9th, August 14th, August 16th, August 21st. They're almost identical in their in the growth pattern that we see there, where, hey, we have these bad areas of growth on the west side of the field, on the east side of the field, and a little kind of a line on the southern part of the field. But from image to image to image, the pattern is consistent. And that's what we would expect in most years, that things don't change dramatically super quickly in the field unless we have a hail event or something weird like that. But, you know, we should see the same pattern pretty consistently from image to image, and we could just watch for areas of problems to either grow or shrink as we take action in the field. But when we got to this August 29th image, all of a sudden things changed a bit. We all of a sudden got some much bigger areas of problems in the center of that field. So when we get an image like this, where there's a pretty dramatic change in a pretty short amount of time, this was only 8 days after the previous image was taken, when we get that kind of change in a short amount of time, what we want to do is, before we run out to that field in a panic and say, hey, something happened here, we better go check it out, there must be you must have had a hail event, or the cows got loose in the field, or something happened here. Before we do that, what we want to do is use that true color option, or the cloud detection version of the image, to just make sure that it's not a cloud that didn't slip through our cloud detection methodology. So when I do that, I click on the true color here on this image. It will load the image that was actually taken by the satellite that day. And what we can see is that right in the middle of that field, it's not a cloud, but it's a cloud shadow. And that shadow was causing a false signal in the satellite imagery that we were providing there for August 29th. So if I got this image on August 29th that was significantly different than the ones collected the week before, I would go over, click that true color or cloud option to look at the actual picture, see that, oh, this is a cloud that the methodology did not capture and erase from the image. So I don't really have a problem I need to run out and see in this field. It's just something that it's a cloud. It was causing a false signal. I can go back about my daily work. So use that true color button to confirm what you're seeing in the satellite imagery before you get too panicked about things that are changing in the field. One other thing I should note here, I think I forgot to mention earlier, in terms of the timing with which these images come. These satellite images are delivered to your climate.com account, your mobile apps, everything, within about 48 hours of the time they are taken. So these are near real-time views of what's happening in your field. So, for example, this August 29th image, it was taken on August 29th. It would have showed up in your account within the next 2 days later. So what is that? August has 30 days? No, 31. So on about August 31st, you would have gotten this image from August 29th. So it takes about 2 days from the time the image is actually taken to the time it shows up into your climate account. So it's near real time and should be a pretty good way to stay on top of what's happening in your fields throughout the course of the season. Okay, what else is there to say here? Well, one of the other things to mention here on the left-hand side of the page with each of those image thumbnails is you get some information about what's been happening in that field to that point in the season. Like if we look at the August 29th image that we're on now, you can see that it says, hey, the rainfall on this field has been 11.4 inches season to date. And the growing degree days are 1,052. And I'll talk about what this low percentage means in a minute. But every image that you get does come with some things to give you some context on it. How much rain has fallen season to date, and that's going to be since the date the field was planted if we have planting information in. If we don't have planting information in, it's going to be since January 1st. But assuming you have the planting maps and the planting data, it'll start that timer on, or that counter on rainfall from the planting date. And then it'll have the growing degree day units as well, so you can say, hey, how does this image compare to what the growth stage of the crop might be as well? Okay, let's look then at one more thing here, and in terms of how you can consume these images, because in addition to coming to the web or going to one of the mobile apps and looking at them, we also deliver these images via email, which I imagine many of you have seen. And email is actually a pretty good way to look at these maps. Let me share my email account, and I'll show you what one of these emails looks like in case you haven't seen it before. But essentially, you get an email anytime that new images have been delivered of any of your fields, and it's your field health report. And you can see this is mine from, yesterday. I think this is my May 30th, 2019 field health report. And it says the following fields had new maps arrive on May 30th. And you can see the date of those images is May 28th. So this is that 2-day delay. The image was taken on May 28th. It got delivered to my account on May 30th. But it allows me to see in a quick view all of the new images that have come in today. And I would highly encourage you to take the couple of minutes or the 30 seconds that it takes to look at this email every day, because this allows you to see what are the new images, what new information do I have, does everything make sense, and is there anything I need to go look at in more detail in my field. And it gives you the vegetation map next to the scouting map in terms of the thumbnail. And at this point in the season, I can look at these 4 images that came in this day, and I can say, well, okay, there's nothing to look at here because the vegetation map is showing all grays and browns, which means it's still bare dirt out there. So the scouting map isn't very important. That's kind of useless information. I know I haven't planted these fields yet. There's nothing to look at, so I can go on about my day. But in general, when we get to later in the season, and it's July or it's August, and we've got crop out in the field, scanning through these images and especially looking at the scouting map will be helpful, because in a 30-second or 1-minute glance, you can look at the patterns of growth in those fields. And presumably you know pretty well where your good spots are in the field and where your bad spots in the field should be. And by looking at those scouting map thumbnails here, you can either say, hey, all those patterns make sense. We're in a wet year, and all the red spots are the low spots that have been drowned out, and so that makes sense, and I get it, and I don't need to go look at that and what's going on in the field. Or maybe you'll see something in one of these maps, these scouting maps, that has a pattern that you don't understand. And you say, hey, I've never had a problem in the northeast corner of the field, but this map is showing me that I've got a low biomass, a low growth area in the northeast corner. I better go over first and check if it's a cloud, make sure it's not a cloud issue. And if it's not, when I look in a little more detail, I probably need to get out to that field and take a look and see what's going on out there. These are all things that, you can, I think looking at the email when it comes in, taking that 30 seconds or a minute every day is going to be a useful, worthwhile use of your time to make sure that you're not letting any problems get out of control, or make sure that things aren't happening out in the field that you're not aware of. Okay, let me show you one other way to look at these images, and this is going to be in the mobile app. So if you do have your iPad with you, feel free to grab that and log into the Black app. Let me see if I can get it to share on let me see if I can get this to work here. I'm going to try and share my iPad now, and just see if I can make this come up. Here we go. Okay. Trying to make this come through. Okay, so in just a second here, you should be able to see my iPad screen. There it is. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to go down to a field, or I'm going to go over to, so when you log into the iPad in the Black app, so the app that I'm in is the one at the bottom of my iPad screen, the black background, the orange app. That's kind of the app that we use most of the time when we're not in the cab collecting data. If we go to that Black app and we launch it, you can see that there's 6 tabs in this. And whether you're using it on an iPad or whether you're using it on an iPhone or an Android phone, the data is all the same. Obviously, on a phone, it's going to be arranged more vertically than horizontally to fit the screen space. But these same 6 tabs exist whether you're on a phone or an iPad. And the nice thing about this Black app is it can be used on an Android phone, where our cab app is only iPhone and iPad. But I come in here, and what I want to talk about here is the field health part of things. So if I click on that field health tab and hit view more, it's going to bring up these images for all of my fields. And there's a few different ways that we can sort them. And by default, your screen is probably sorted by newest. So this is a way that if you haven't been, if you haven't been looking at the daily emails as they come in about what your images look like, this is a place where you can always come and say, okay, well, just show me the most recent image for all of my fields. And you can see that for my fields, some of them have images as recent as May 29th, some are May 28th, some are May 27th, and on down the line when the last time that we were able to get a cloud-free picture of that field. There's a few different ways we can sort this screen. If I've got a lot of fields, I may want to sort it by crop type in the upper right-hand corner and say first, well, let's just look at my corn fields, or let's look at my wheat fields or my soybean fields or whatever on a crop by crop basis. Or I can choose to look at all my fields in one view as I have it currently. And then in the left-hand side of the page on the top, where right now they're sorted by newest, so I can see my newest images first, there's two other sorts in there, and one of them I think is pretty useful. Well, first we can sort by name, so if we have a lot of fields, it'll help us more quickly find a field alphabetically in our list. But there's that option of low biomass there, and that's one that I would probably recommend that you leave it on, because I think there's some pretty useful that's a pretty useful sorting, and let me show you what it means. So if I click on sort by low biomass, what it's going to do is it's going to rearrange all my latest imagery and say, let's float to the top the images where there are the biggest biomass problems. So what it does is it looks at the field and it says, what percentage of this field is red in the scouting map? Basically, what percentage of this field is of a significantly lower biomass than the average, so that we can make those, more visible to the user. So, I mean, I've got this little 36 Corcoran field, which isn't a really relevant field, so I've got a couple of strips in it. But I've got the Corcoran field there that's got 22% low, and you can see the low biomass quantification in the lower right-hand corner of each of these cards. So Corcoran is 22% low, Fresno is 17% low, Louisville is 12% low, Arlington is 12% low, and it goes down the list from there. But what it does is it allows me to, at any point in the season, very quickly identify the fields where I have the biggest potential problems, because those are the ones I probably want to act on first. Because if I've got a field that's got a little 1 acre drowned out area, I'm probably less concerned about that than a field that's got a 30 acre, a nitrogen deficiency area that's showing through in this map. So what this does, floats to the top those fields where we've got the biggest areas of potential problems, so you can be aware of those and hopefully get out and deal with those fields first, and so on. So hopefully that makes sense. But sorting by low biomass, I think, is a pretty useful way to look at the imagery in the Climate Field View Black app. Okay, what else do I want to talk about in this mobile app? There's probably two other things that I'll talk about in the mobile app, and then we'll move on to scouting and note-taking. The two other things I want to talk about here, if we go back to the overview in our Climate Field View app, there's a settings button at the bottom of the page, and there's two things that I want to look at here in terms of notifications. So when I go to settings, there's notifications at the top, and if I click on notifications, what I can do is I can look at my imagery updates here, and I can choose how I want to receive those imagery updates, whether I want to receive email notifications or push notifications to the app. I think you want to have your email notifications on, so please make sure those are turned on if that makes sense to you, and you can do that in the Black app, the Climate Field View Black app here. If you turn on push notifications, what that's going to do is it's going to, send your app will ping you every time on your phone that says, hey, you have new field health images. It'll give you a mobile notification in the app. The other thing that we can do here, for those of you who are dealers or are working with a lot of different farmers, you can choose who you get imagery updates for. So in the section, operations for notifications, the last line here is imagery updates. So if I click on imagery updates there, I have a number of different farmers that share their operations with me. And so when I look at this list, I can say, not only do I want to receive email imagery updates for my operation, but I also want to receive it for Jay Kadari's operation or Kurt Weilman's operation or so on. You can add check marks here to make sure that you receive updates for more operations than just your own. Okay, the other thing, last thing I'll do here on this Black app as far as imagery and things like that is if you have your iPad or your iPhone with you, you don't need to worry about this on an Android system because it's taken care of by default. If you're on an iPhone or an iPad, what you'll want to do is you'll want to go over to Fields at the bottom of the page. So you're on the main overview, go to Fields. If you're in your iPad, it's in the little 3 bars. You can choose an individual field in that little 3-bar button. But when you get to an individual field and choose any field in your operation, what you'll want to do is there's 3 buttons in the upper right-hand corner of this page, 3 little dots. And if we click on those 3 little dots, you want to make sure that these 3 options are enabled: the Show Pin Notes, the Show Region Notes, and Show Current Location. By default, when you install the Climate Field View app, some of these are turned off, and you want to turn these on to make sure that when you can use these maps effectively for scouting. Because if you don't have Show Current Location turned on, then when you go out to that field and you have your phone in your hand or you have your iPad in your hand, you're not going to see your little blue location dot flashing to indicate where you are standing in that field as you walk through there doing your scouting activities. If you don't have Show Pin Notes on, you're not going to see the notes there that you're taking and things like that. So take the time to make sure that if you're using an iPad or an iPhone, that you go to an individual field, you click those 3 dots in the upper right-hand corner, and then you go ahead and make sure that those 3 options are enabled. Okay, that said, let's go to some of the note-taking and the scouting and note-taking functionality. And give me just a second. Okay, so let's go to the scouting and note-taking functionality. And to do that, I am going to go ahead and, well, I can just use this field that I have here in front of me. So when we're in the field, we're probably going to be using our mobile apps on our phone or an iPad. And what we'll generally do is, I think this Black app is probably the best place to take your scouting notes and things when you're in the field. So you can just go, you launch the app, it looks like this. You click on Fields to get to your list of fields, and you find a field that you're going to be in that day. And when you pull up to the field in your truck, you're going to see your little blue location dot flashing on the side of the road where you're parked. And you can look at the most recent image here on the screen on your phone or your iPad, and you can say, hey, and I would encourage that you do this, that every time you're out in the field and you're sitting next to one of your fields this summer, take your phone out, look at the most recent image, and just say, hey, is there anything there that's interesting that doesn't make sense to me that I need to go check out, or can I go on about my day? Because, again, this is that treasure map to scouting. And so I might pull up this image, and I farm this field, and I say, these patterns, some of it makes sense. I can see why the western part of the field is showing some different patterns than the eastern part of the field, because I did plant 2 different hybrids here, and so I are seeing some different responses here. One of them is a more dense biomass or dense green color than the other, and so this image is picking that out. But what's going on in the far eastern part of that field? I've got this red area over there that's showing that it's lower biomass than the rest of the field. That doesn't make sense to me. I've never had problems over there, so I better go check that out. And so what would happen is I'd see my little blue location dot along the side of the field, and I'd probably actually drive over to the northern part of this field here and park there, and then I'd start walking into the field. And imagine we're in August and the corn is, 8 feet tall. It's kind of hard to figure out, well, how far do I need to walk in to find that problem area if I'm working with hard copy maps, or if I just looked at this back in the office. How far do I need to go before I know I'm standing in the problem area? Well, if you have your phone or your iPad with you, that blue location dot is going to move as you walk in the field. So you just keep walking until your blue location dot is in the middle of that red area, and then you look around and you see what's happening. And so you might walk into this field and say, okay, I've got to the right area. I can see what's happening here. And maybe I've got a spider mite problem, or maybe I've got whatever. I've got frog eye leaf spot, or I've got some disease issue or nutrient deficiency. Whatever it is that I determine that's going on out there, it might be something that I want someone to spray for, or I want to come and do some remedial action on. And so I can go out in that part of the field. When I get there, I can tap the little pin button in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and say I want to drop a pin. And so I tap it where I'm standing, and it's going to drop a pin in that part of the field. I get to take some notes here. I get to say, hey, we have spider mites here, or whatever it is. So spider mites. I can add a photo if I want using the camera on my phone or my iPad to take a picture and show it to the other people in my operation. I can choose to make this pin either seasonal or permanent. In this case, it's a seasonal thing. I don't always have spider mites in this part of the field, so I would only want to see this for 2019. I wouldn't want to see this pin again next year in 2020. But if it was something like a tile outlet or something that is a permanent feature of the field, maybe I want to mark it and make it permanent. So every year, anytime someone looks at this field, they always see that pin. I can choose the color of the pin because and you can set up your own paradigms here that, hey, yellow pins are disease pins and blue pins are water damage and purple pins are, stand count pins. But you can set up your own paradigm within your operation as far as what the different colors mean and choose different colors for your pins. I can go ahead and save this. So I can say, hey, we have spider mites here. I drop the pin, and when I hit save, this note gets saved. And let me just move that pin a little bit so it's a little more visible. Where did it go? And you can tap on the pin at any point to grab it, edit it, and move it around in the field. But you can see my little yellow pin hopefully there. And when I put it in the right place, then and I save it, it's going to get saved and sent to all of the phones and iPads who have been shared on this field. So maybe I'm the farmer and I've chosen to share this field's data with my agronomist, with my seed salesman, with my brother-in-law, and my landlord. All those people will then have immediate access to this pin and this note that was taken. So maybe it's the guy at the co-op who's going to come out here and do some spraying for this. Now he has the note. He can see where it is. He can find this location in the field. He can do what he needs to do. One thing that doesn't happen, though, is when I drop this pin, their phone doesn't buzz. They don't get a buzz on their phone saying, hey, a pin was just dropped on this field. You better check it out. So if you want someone to proactively receive notification of something that's happened of something that you've marked in the field, you need to do this a little bit differently. Yeah, you can still save the pin exactly as we did here. But one of the other things you'll want to do, if I tap on that pin again and go back into it, there's a little blue box with an arrow in the upper right-hand corner of this little dropping a pin interface here. And if I click that little blue box with an arrow here, I can choose to send all this information via an email, via a text message, via Facebook, via whatever, sharing options I have on my phone or on my iPad. And so I might want to send this via text message. And I say, click this text message option. It says, okay, puts all the details into this text message. That in the home field, we have a spider mite tag. It was scouted on May 30th at 7:40 a.m. It's a yellow pin, and there's a link to the Google Map. So someone, even if they don't have Climate Field View, they can click that Google Map link to locate exactly where that was marked and find that location in the field. And so I just push this. If there's someone in particular who's going to deal with this problem, I can send this via text message to that person so that their phone actually buzzes, they get the information, and they can't miss it, and then they can locate that problem whether or not they are a Climate Field View user. So that's another way that you can share information across your operation when someone is out in the field looking at things and wants to make sure that other people in the operation are aware of the things that they're seeing while they're out in the field. One other way we can do this is I dropped a pin there to mark that area. Let's say I had walked this area and I had kind of seen where the spider mite issues existed and that they kind of existed in a region rather than at a point that I wanted to mark. In that case, I can use the button next to the pin in the lower right-hand corner. There's this little field region tool with a circle. And if I take that field region tool with a circle, I could say, hey, you know what, I walked it, and this is the area we need to spray, whatever the case might be. I can draw my shape as precisely as I want. And when I do that, I can go in and add a note, and it's exactly the same interface as dropping a pin. But instead of dropping a pin, it's going to mark a whole region so that the person can say, okay, well, someone else has already identified the area of damage or the area that needs to be treated. So then they can just pull up their phone, get out in the sprayer, get out in whatever it is they're going to do, and go and treat that particular area of the field rather than a point location. And again, when you create a region like this, same thing. I can use that little box with an arrow on it to send the data via text message to make sure that the recipient's phone does buzz and they do get that notification, in addition to it being passively available to them in their mobile app. Okay, let's see what else I want to go through here. I think we're getting close to, there's a couple of things to cover here. One of them is, I'm going to show you, there are some tools that exist in the CAB app that don't exist in the Black app that may be useful to you, and I do want to show you what those look like because there's a little bit of different functionality there. So let me go over and use my CAB app, and the CAB app is this one at the bottom of the screen that has a white background and a gray F and the word CAB. And if I go into the CAB app and I go to my map, I can always look at my field health images in the CAB app as well. But let me pull up a particular field here for you and see if I can make this work. Here it is. Tunes. Let me get my in-season field health. And what I want to show you here is this was a field where something kind of interesting happened. And I think it was towards the end of August. It's not as easy to look at your field health images in the CAB app because it's not really what it's designed for. But you can look at them one by one. You can't see like a whole series in time of how the field health changed in these fields. But let me see if I can find the right one here. Let me see if I can. That's not what I wanted. 2027. Go. That's not the right one. I gotta find the right one because it doesn't allow you to see them all at once here. That one, no. It was July, I think. So this is kind of the pattern that existed in this field in this year in 2018. You can see that we had a pretty consistent pattern of growth. The edges of the field, the headlands weren't as good as the rest of the field. There are a couple of pivots here, and so those corners just don't perform as well as the rest of the field. And so this is what the field looked like on July 24th. And if I go in there and I look at the next image for August 1st, you can see that it changes pretty dramatically here on August 1st. And if I look at the next image then on August 3rd, it's fairly similar to what we saw on August 1st. Basically that northern part of the field, northwestern part of the field, something happened there where it went from, hey, the growth is pretty good, to all of a sudden we had a problem in the northern part of that field. And what it was is that a hailstorm had come through this area, and it had hit this field somewhere there between July 24th and August 1st when that image changed pretty dramatically. And this is another one of those good use cases for field health images where when you have hail damage, when you have windstorms or green snap, or you have certain, in a year like this where we've got a lot of water and we've got standing water in the field and we've got ponds, you can use the CAB app to understand the size of those problem areas very precisely, actually, because they're going to show up as these red areas in these images, and you can just draw circles around them using the draw region tool, and it will tell you precisely how many acres you've circled in that region when you use the CAB app. Right now, that's not available in the Black app. The Black app doesn't allow you to see that acreage for fields that haven't been harvested yet, but the CAB app does. And the way it works is when you pull up an image like this, and you want to know, hey, how much of this field has been damaged by hail? Because my crop insurance adjuster is coming out. I know he's going to give me a number. Hopefully he gives me a good number. But if he doesn't, I want to have some data and some evidence to share with him that hopefully can get me to a more fair settlement. I can click the little arrow button next to the house in the upper right-hand corner, and I can say I want to create a field region in this menu here. And it's going to say, how do I want to create this field region? Do I want to draw freehand to create a polygon, select passes? I just want to do a freehand draw here. And so I could draw around the part of the field that I can see has been impacted where, hey, this part was dark green before the hailstorm came through. Now it's all red and yellow, so I know that I've got visible damage in the field there. And when I draw that boundary, you can see that it tells me it's 36.3 acres that I've circled. And so to the extent that, drawing some of these freehand boundaries around ponds or drowned out areas in your field or hail damage is helpful, just wanted to let you know that does exist. You can go ahead and draw these areas and get acreage counts on areas that may be damaged. Okay, one other thing that you can do when creating regions, if you are, if there's a particular part of the field that you want to evaluate, you can also select particular passes. Let me show you how that works. Let me go to map and let's do this. Town line middle. Go to my planting map. Seed treatment. So this is a particular map where the farmer had mapped where he had treated seed and where he had non-treated seed in the field. He had the Celtec NSP. Basically, he had split the planter, and some of the rows were treated and some of the rows were not. And so if I had done this application and I wanted to track how things were going in just the treated seed, rather than kind of drawing a freehand region around them, when I go in there to create a field region, there is the option to select passes. And this allows you to very precisely pick just the parts of the field where you did something, where you sprayed a particular product, or where you were done a trial. And I can just come in here and tap on, well, actually, it's not going to work in this case because it was a split planter. So the passes that I'm selecting here are selecting the actual pass of the planter where half of the planter was treated and half of the planter was not treated. So that's actually not the right example. But let me go back and say not seed treatment. Let me not do that. But let me just do planting. Where is it? Variety. So I come in here and you can see all the planter passes here now. And I don't have two different varieties in here, but imagine if I had made some change in variety, I can come in here again and say, hey, I want to create a field region where I just am tracking. Oh, create it. Let me do this right. Create a field region, select passes, and pick just that pass of the planter. I can change the end lines as much as I want, moving back and forth to cut the headlands out. But just another option for you when you are selecting particular parts of the field. You can choose select particular passes to precisely define regions that you want to track throughout the course of the season. Okay. Last couple things here to talk about. Let me see if I can. Okay. So the last couple things I want to talk about is, in order to get this field health imagery stuff to work well, in order for us to be able to see what we want to see, I'm going to go back to my web page if I can and show you this here. And again, any questions about anything, please feel free to type those in using the chat or the question and answer functionality. But let me try sharing my web page. One of the things that you're going to want to do is make sure that your field boundaries are good, because when we send you these satellite images of your field, we're going to send you the area that is defined by the field boundaries that you have in your climate field view system. And over time, field boundaries for some of you have probably gotten messed up a bit, and sometimes, you've changed the way you farm the field, or somehow the field boundaries have gotten to the point where they're not as accurate as they should be. And the best place to edit these is on a web browser at a computer where you have access to a mouse. So when I'm logged in on climate.com, you can see all my field boundaries on the left-hand side of the page. And what I can scan through there and I can look at these field boundary shapes on the left-hand side and say, yeah, that looks right, that looks right. And hopefully they all look good. But sometimes you're going to run across some that, hey, that's just not what the field is shaped like. And if you see one of those situations, you can use this edit fields functionality, and this is only in climate.com. You can't edit your field boundaries in either of our mobile apps. It's really to be done on climate.com at a computer, ideally. But if you click edit fields, you'll have this little blue pen with a piece of paper on the right-hand side of the field list there, where you can say, hey, you know what? This particular field, that's not the right boundary of this field, and I want to edit it. And if I click that little editing pen, it'll bring me over to that field, and I'll see that, oh yeah, this isn't the right field boundary. This should be the full pivot here. And you can just start dragging these little dots around to make the field the right shape. And you can drag them around and be as precise as you want to be to get this field into the right format that matches the actual shape of the areas that we farm. Anytime you click a big white dot, that part of the line will go away and it'll make the shape more simple. And anytime you take one of these little dots and drag it out, it'll create new vertices in between that'll allow you to make the shape more detailed. So pretty simple to come in here and say, you know what, this isn't right, I need to fix this up, and click the dots and drag them around to form the right shape of that field. One other thing is that there's a couple other things you can do here as you're, simplifying and making your shape the right thing, and I'm not going to take the time to make this the full right shape. But maybe like you've got a road in this field or you've got a drainage ditch in this field, something that isn't farmed that you want cut out, or there's a homestead on the corner of the field. You can obviously do that part just by saying, hey, there's a house over here that we need to cut out of this field, so let's make the cutout appropriate to imagine if there was a house in the yard there. Let's not have that part of the field be in the imagery, because there's not crop growing there. So that's not a part of the field that I want to have captured by the satellite imagery. So you can cut that out as I've shown here. But also, if you've got a road or something going in, let's say I have an access road to my pivot in this particular case, I could say, let's cut out a waterway, road, whatever. And if you just click on the map somewhere, and then you draw a line, or it might be a road that bends, whatever the case might be. You click the last point, it's going to ask you, should ask me, that's not working the way it's supposed to right at the moment. Let's hit cancel. What it should do here, remove waterway. Let's try this again. Something looks like it went wrong here. Well, it's not doing what it's supposed to do, but it's supposed to ask you how wide is that waterway or how wide is that road, and you might say 15 feet, 20 feet, 30 feet, whatever it is, and it'll automatically cut out a line for you there out of the shape to remove that piece from the field. But for some reason, it's not working here. I'll probably have to reboot my computer to get that to work properly. But you can certainly I think it's worthwhile to take the time to pull up your fields, go on climate.com, go through that list on the left-hand side of the page, make sure that all your field boundaries look right, and to the extent that you have any problems, go ahead and clean those up here so you are getting accurate satellite imagery as the season goes along. I think that is most of it. Let me show you one more thing here before I quit. So if you are working with other imagery providers, we provide this 5-meter resolution satellite imagery that is it comes automatically with every Field View Plus account for every field that you farm. But I know a lot of you tend to work or may be working with higher resolution imagery providers, third-party companies that are flying your fields with either fixed-wing aircraft or drones. A lot of those companies are partners with the Climate Corporation, where you can choose to see that imagery in field view alongside your planting and your harvest maps. And so where do you see that? If you are working with one of those companies, ask them if they work with field view. They probably do, whether it's Deveron or Terravion or Centera or whoever it is. A lot of them do have the ability to feed that data right into field view. And if you are working with them, when you choose, hey, what image do I want to see? Field health is always the satellite, but there's this other imagery section, and other imagery will be the place where you can go to see imagery provided by other third-party companies that you may be working with right alongside everything else in your field view account. So you have one stop to see all the information associated with your field rather than having to go back and forth between multiple apps. So if you are working with a third-party provider, ask them if they have a partnership with FieldView and you can view your imagery there. They probably do. Okay, I think that's about it. I know we're up about on the hour, so I'm going to stop there, see if any questions have come in. I'll be happy to answer those. Let me just switch back to look at see if any questions have come in. Looks like one maybe, or a couple here. Question here about can drone imagery be imported and what formats if yes. So yes, as mentioned, a lot of imagery from third-party providers does come in automatically if you choose to sync up your link with that company. But if you're taking your own drone imagery, yes, you can import it. You go to our web page, you go to climate.com, you go to import at the top of the page, and you import a zip file, and the zip file has to be a GeoTIFF. So as long as you can export a GeoTIFF from the software that you're using, and you can zip that GeoTIFF, you'll be able to import it on our data import page and view it alongside everything else. So feel free to, if you've got your own drone imagery, more high-resolution stuff, you can import it into Climate Field View and view it alongside all your other maps and use all the same functionality. And that looks like about it. I don't see any other questions that have come in, so hopefully everything I talked about here today was clear. Hopefully this is helpful. I hope everyone also can get into the field sooner than later. I know there's a lot of weather issues going on around the country, so best of luck to everyone with getting in this planting season. And thanks again for taking some time out of the day to join this webinar. We look forward to working with everyone this season and hope to talk to you all soon. Thanks very much.